Shadow Minister Danny Kruger.
Thank you very much indeed, Mrs Vaz, and my congratulations and thanks to the Honourable Member for Aberdeenshire North and Murray East for bringing the debate, and I'm grateful to everyone's contributions. It's been very, very helpful debate. Happy to take interventions from Honourable Members who weren't able to get in if there's time. So let me acknowledge first that I recognise and agree with Honourable Members who have pointed out that the existence and the extent of poverty in our country is shameful. It's a source of deep shame to our country that we have so many people reliant on the charity of others for essentials. And I want to quickly pay tribute to the food banks in my constituency and in my former constituency of Devizes, who do such good work with food banks there, and also in previous work that I've done with the Hammersmith and Fulham food banks. So I echo the points made by honourable members about the great work and the valuable work that these organisations do. Happy to give way.
Thank you very much for giving way. The work I've seen at the DN7 Food Bank and the Isle of Axholme Food Share project is extraordinary. The volunteers are inspiring. The same can be said of Hatfield's Pre-Loved Uniform Bank and also of the Hygiene Bank in Doncaster. Would the honourable member agree with me, though, that whilst their work is amazing, that these type of banks are not the kind of banks that we want to see grow on our high streets or even exist in the first place?
Danny Kruger.
I'm grateful, and I recognise those points, and I pay tribute to his local food banks as well. So let's just look at what has been happening, and honourable members have cited some of these facts. The fact is that the Trussell Trust, particularly, the number of parcels handed out by that organisation doubled over the course of the last Parliament in light of the COVID crisis and then the cost of living crisis. And while we should not, and I do emphasise this, I don't think we should take food bank use as a perfect proxy for poverty. The fact is data is patchy and it is affected by the supply of food banks. There is also an important displacement effect. It's not necessarily the case that all the need that is identified by food banks is new need. It might formerly have been met by other sources, by family, friends and other community organisations. Nevertheless, I think the profile of food bank use does track the economy and the state of poverty in our country. We saw it spike during the lockdowns, it then declined and then spiked again with the cost of living crisis. And I'm afraid to say it hasn't really declined since. And we now see that 1.4% of households have used a food bank in the last month and 3% in the last year. These are very significant numbers. So what is going on? Echo the point made by my honourable friend earlier from Salisbury about the complexity of the causes for food bank use. But the fact is, we recognise the obvious point that it is ultimately down to household income. And I want to cite the work of Hunger in the UK, who have pointed out that the main reasons for problems in people's household income are to do with difficulties with benefits, mentioned by many honourable members, the existence of in-work poverty, and the difficulty in gaining well-paid work, particularly among disabled people and carers. Happy to give way.
Can I thank the right honourable member for giving way? A number of constituents have written to me expressing their struggle to afford food despite being in work. It's not an isolated issue. In mid-2022, almost 90% of those referred to food banks in Wales were in work and had such low incomes that they were living in destitution. Would the honourable member agree with me that the working poor created by the last government is disgracefully reminiscent of Victorian times?
Shadow Minister Danny Kruger.
Well, I do recognise the extent of the problem of in-work poverty and of people reliant on both on benefits to sustain their incomes and on additional support from the outside. I don't accept that this is a new phenomenon. And in fact, I'll come to the last government's record in a moment, but I know that the Honourable Lady would like to intervene too.
One of the best policies of the last government was the £20 additional uplift to universal credit during the pandemic. It cut poverty, it stopped poverty growing in its tracks, and it shows the impact of increasing access to money, not to be facile, on poverty. Does the honourable member share my hope that the government will bring forward their review of universal credit as promised in the Labour manifesto?
I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady, and yes, indeed, I very much look forward to that review coming along soon. Quickly, because a lot of mention has been made of the record of the last government, I recognise the extent of particularly of low wage growth and indeed in-work poverty that we've seen. But the fact is, Madam Chair, that if we look at absolute poverty, which is ultimately the measure that we should be looking at if we're thinking about the extent of destitution and food poverty, we saw 1 million people in absolute poverty, fewer people in absolute poverty after housing costs in 2024 than in 2010, including 100,000 fewer children, 200,000 fewer pensioners, and 700,000 working-age people. So there was real impact made on absolute poverty in the last government, and overall 1 million fewer workless households than in 2010. Much of that was driven by universal credit, and those of us who worked in the social sector in the years before 2010 might remember the absolute labyrinth, the complexity and the perverse incentives that were created by the mess of the benefit system that we inherited in 2010 and we rationalised and improved. There's also, just to mention quickly, the enormous, the £100 billion cost of living package that was put together by the last government in light of the energy shock. Now let's look at what this government is doing. The most significant policy that the government has so far announced with reference to poverty is the withdrawal of the winter fuel payment. 10 million pensioners will be denied this essential benefit, including 70% of disabled pensioners. This is surely not a record that honourable members are proud of. Happy to give way.
I'm grateful to the Shadow Minister for giving way. He's made a point around the government's difficult decision to withdraw the winter fuel payment. If it's something he feels so strongly about, why did his party pledge to do it in 2017?
Danny Kruger.
Well, we didn't pledge to do it and we didn't do it. And I do think it's important that we should have universal entitlements to these essential benefits. And if there does need to be some means testing, surely it should only penalise, as it were, withdraw the payment from the wealthiest pensioners, not 90% as is happening under this policy. The other thing the government has done, of course, is to impose a significant tax on employment through the national insurance rise, which they promised not to do in their manifesto. And the cost of this, the impact will fall disproportionately on low-paid workers who will receive the impact of that tax in their wage packet. Now, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, no friend of my party, I believe, Madam Chair, has pointed out that poverty is due to rise because of the budget introduced by the Chancellor. Every household type, except pensioners, will be poorer. All single-parent families will be £1,000 poorer. An average couple with children will be £1,760 poorer. Inequality will be higher. That's all the testament of the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. The Office for Budget Responsibility points out that real wages will fall. And indeed, the budget has caused the OBR to lower their real wage growth forecast by 0.5%. As the OBR says, the budget shifts real resources out of private households' income in order to devote more resources to public service provision, which might indeed be the policy that the party opposite wants to pursue, but the effect of it will be, as the OBR acknowledges, to reduce household income.
Would the Shadow Minister acknowledge that the OBR actually said that 90% of households will be better off under this budget, and it's only the 10% of the wealthiest households that will actually feel the cost of this budget, making sure that we are spreading the costs on those shoulders who can most bear it?
Danny Kruger.
Well, as I say, I don't think withdrawing the winter fuel payment from 10 million pensioners reflects a transfer of the burden onto those who can bear it most, nor does imposing a taxation on the low-paid jobs to do that. So what should we do about all this? Now, I'm sorry to say I haven't heard enough in the debate so far about what actually could and should be done, although I do acknowledge that the honourable member who opened the debate made some suggestions, many of which I do agree with, particularly around the importance of an adequate safety net. Look forward to the universal credit review that the government's bringing forward, focus on nutrition and on empowering communities. I agree very strongly with all of those. I don't agree with the need for the essentials guarantee, although I do respect that campaign. I don't think transferring responsibility for setting benefit levels to an independent body, essentially to an unaccountable quango, is the right way to go. This is essentially policy for the government. The government should be responsible and accountable to Parliament for, rather than an independent body. What we need to do, looking quickly at the proposals, the drivers of food bank use by Hunger UK, so we need to improve the benefit system. We absolutely need to make that quicker and easier. I look forward to seeing how the government's going to improve pension credit applications to improve winter fuel payment access. We need to drive up wages. Again, I deprecate the introduction of taxation on wages. And we need to grow our jobs market. We need to ensure that it's easier and better for employers to take workers on and to promote them, which I'm afraid to say that the employee rights bill, which we're anticipating, will not do by giving punitive obligations on employers from day one, will do. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm conscious that time's almost up, so let me finish with this point. I want to praise the flexibility of food banks, the human relationship. The honourable member talks about the powerful sense of community that they imply. There was a moment during the COVID pandemic, a quiet revolution happened that momentarily offered a better social and economic model in which innovations, particularly around food and provision to the poorest among our neighbours, were enabled to flourish. Remarkable innovations happened. I agree we want food banks to be redundant. But while we have hardship, they can be an important part of the mix. I pay tribute to other innovations like social supermarkets as well. And lastly, the Household Support Fund. I don't agree with the honourable member that we need to have more kind of central strategy and direction for that. I think its great value is the innovation that it enables, and it empowers local communities, something he said he believed in, to ensure that local authorities can take responsibility for supporting their communities. I think that is an important innovation that the government that I supported brought in, and I hope it will continue.
Thank you.